Welcome. How's everybody doing tonight? Ken Haedrich here, Dean of the Pie Academy. And who are you? We've had so many people sign up. This is really exciting. We've had so many people sign up for this class that I'm really anxious to hear who you are and where you're tuning in from. So please let me know in the chat. Sweetie, are we getting comments in the chat? Give me a thumbs up if the audio is good. I always like it when we do that. So a nice thumbs up or audio is good comment would be wonderful. As I was saying, this is really exciting because our classes, our typical classes, we do pie classes a couple of times a month. Typically we have 25, 35 people signed up. Well, we have had over 250 people sign up for this class, and I very much doubt that they'll all be here tonight or you'll all be here tonight, but it would be really exciting if you were. So that brings in a whole new set of circumstances, you know, keeping up with your comments, finding out who you are, where you're coming from. Sweetie, I'm anxious to hear who we have. Okay. Give me a few names and locations. I'm anxious to hear.
Okay, let's see, Deb in Lakeville, Minnesota.
Hi, Deb in Lakeville, Minnesota. Good to have you here. Who else do we have?
Tucson.
Tucson? Who do we have in Tucson?
Grace.
Hi, Grace in Tucson. How are you doing today?
Kathy in Virginia.
Hi, Kathy in Virginia.
Devin in Ashland, Oregon.
Very good. Devin, did you say? Mm-hmm. Devin in Ashland, Oregon. Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country out there.
And Joan in Happy Valley, Oregon.
Hi, Joan in Happy Valley. This is wonderful. I love hearing from folks all over the country. You know, I did, when people were signing up, I normally keep a track of who's signing up and where they're coming in from. But with 250 people signing up, I simply couldn't do it. But I did notice that we had a lot of people signing up in the middle of the night. So either we have a lot of people tuning in who don't sleep very well, or perhaps we have people signing in or watching from different parts of the world. In fact, in your comments, when you tell me who you are and where you're coming from, if you're in a foreign country, let me know that. I'd love to know. Who else do we have?
Well, Kevin's in Dallas.
Kevin's in Dallas? Yeah, that counts. How are you doing, Kevin from Dallas? Great to have you here.
Roseanne in New Jersey.
Who's that? Roxanne in New Jersey?
Roseanne.
Roseanne in New Jersey. How you doing, Roseanne?
Al in Wilmington, Delaware.
Oh, hi, Al. Al's one of our regulars. How you doing, Al, tonight?
And Billy in Santa Rosa, California.
Hi, Billy. How are you?
Dennis in Palm Desert,
Dennis in Palm Desert?
Mm-hmm.
So we have people from all over the country. That's great.
Boston, Massachusetts. McNabb, Illinois.
McNabb, Illinois. Who's from McNabb, Illinois?
Vicki.
Hi, Vicki in McNabb. How are you doing?
And Deborah in Tucson, Arizona.
Hi, Deborah in Tucson.
Sheila in Okanogan.
Sheila in
Okanogan, Washington.
Okanogan, Washington. Very good.
Not sure if that's how you pronounce it. Pat in Scottsdale.
Hi, Pat in Scottsdale. You know, one other thing I'd like you to do, if you haven't checked in yet, put your name and tell us where you're from. Since tonight's class is all about making a food processor pie dough, why don't you put a little comment after where you're from? And I'd be curious, do you never use a food processor to make your pie dough? You could put never. Do you always use the food processor to make your pie dough, or do you sometimes use it? And if you're scared of doing it, you could write scared. We're going to teach you how to take care of that. So put some of those comments in. I'd be very curious to hear.
Always.
So anyway, let me do some introductions here. The voice you hear in the background and the person who I'm talking to is she's known as Sweetie. She's also my wife Bev, and she sort of runs things behind the scenes here. I'm just the hapless fellow in front of the camera who knows how to make a pie, but she's running all the different cameras. We have 3 cameras here tonight. We have one looking at me. Sweetie, show them the top down. We have a top down camera for when we do start, getting down to business and making the pie dough. Then we also have a side camera that we probably won't use as much tonight as we normally do in one of our classes, but this is a great view. When I start rolling out the dough, I'll have Bev switch over to that camera from time to time. So it's a really nice sort of I wouldn't say 360 view you get here, but it's a nice view because you can watch the action from 3 different camera angles. I'll talk. Of course, in just a minute, I'm going to talk more about what I'm doing. I'm going to introduce my 2 food processors, one of which I love more than the other one. But first, let me talk about some ground rules here, because if we do, and I don't know how many people do we have tuned in. Sweetie, can you tell how many people we have
90.
tuned in? Yeah, 90 or 100 people right now. And it's going to be a little tricky handling comments and questions. So as far as ground rules go, if you have a question, this would be useful. If you want to comment or talk to somebody in the chat, that's great. We love when people do that. If you have a question, I have a couple of requests for you. One, that you sort of limit your questions to what's going on the screen at the time. And 2, if you would put a Q in front of your question, so that way that'll flag it to Bev that it's actually a question and not just a comment you're making to somebody, and that way she'll be able to pick the questions out more easily in the chat, because that chat gets pretty active over there. So that would be great if you could do those couple of things. One other thing I can mention, I don't think it's going to be a problem because the skies don't look that bad right now. But we have had a stretch of days here with some bad weather. We get stormy weather comes in. Occasionally the computer has gone out. We had an instance a couple of weeks ago where I think the lightning bolt sort of made made our mouse go dead. So we had to very quickly midstream. We had to switch out our mouse. So it got a little hairy there. So if you could do those things, I would really, really appreciate it. So we are here tonight to make food processor pastry, which is something I've been doing for a long, long time. The food processor first came out in the mid-70s, and I didn't get one until they really didn't become popular, widely accepted until we started getting into the 80s. And one day, about mid-80s, my white food processor here, that's how old this is, it showed up on my doorstep. I think Cuisinart sent it to me back in those days. I was writing a lot about cooking equipment, and especially bakeware and cookware and stuff like that, baking sheets, baking pans. So I ended up with one of these food processors. And truthfully, the thing sat on the shelf for a long time, or in my closet for a long time. I never used it because I learned to make pie dough the old-fashioned way with a pastry blender, like one of these. You probably have one of these at home. Here's one. Here's another one that I bought a few years back. I don't know if you have one of these. This has got some kind of little doohickey on it. For clearing the dough out. It's kind of useless. I actually prefer this kind. It has just sort of blunt wires on it. But we're not going to talk about those tonight. We're not going to get off track and talk about those, other than to say, back in the day, when I first started reading cookbooks, back when I got into cooking in earnest back in the 70s, it wasn't unusual to come across pie cookbooks and pie recipes where it would mention, cutting in the fat, cutting in the butter with a pastry blender, but it was also very common to see mentions of cutting in the fat with 2 butter knives like this. I never could get the hang of that. I thought it was, I always felt so klutzy doing it. So I never really embraced that one. But at some point, I took my food processor off the shelf, swallowed my pride a little bit, because I was, like I said, I was an old school pie maker, and thought, well, let's give this thing a whirl and see how it does with pie pastry. And it took me a few years to sort of, become totally comfortable with it. And it's not going to take you that long, believe me. But eventually I sort of decided this was really the way to go. And nowadays, you know, years and years later, and for many years now, I really don't use, I can't say I don't use anything but, because I do write pie cookbooks and I do write a lot of recipes, and I know different people like different methods for making pie pastry. If you have any of my pie books, if you have Pie Academy, my most recent one, then you know that I cover all sorts of different methods for making pie dough. So I know that people like to do it different ways. So, but I do make no bones about the fact that I really prefer using my food processor. We're going to get started here in just a minute. I don't know exactly how long this is going to take tonight. I know some of you may have young children you need to put to bed, so we're going to probably, you know, try to keep this to 45 minutes, you know, tops, and we'll see how that goes. But let me just tell you that this is my larger food processor. I think it's a 16 cup, although on the side the hash marks say the largest quantity on there says 14 cups. I've always thought this was a 12 cup here, my old one. I thought this was 12 cups, so I call that a 12 cup. But this one is much, much older. Like I said, I got this somewhere back in the 80s, I'm certain, and it's really taken a beating over the years. It's you know, cracked here. At one point something broke in here and I had to fix that. I don't even know how I did that anymore. But this thing has been, it's like the Velveteen Rabbit of my, you know, food processors. It's sort of been, you know, things are coming off it and it's being worn down. This button, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a button here that says pulse that just says puh. So anyway, but the funny thing is I bought this big one back in, I don't know, about 10 years ago now. I walked into a Williams-Sonoma, and you know how it is. You walk into a Williams-Sonoma, it's very easily to be seduced by all the stuff there, and before you know it, your wallet is much lighter than when you came in. But I really have never really warmed up to this one. And as a courtesy, I will remind you that the food processor I really love, when I replace this one, which probably won't be that long, is the one I put on your link page. I sent you a whole list of links on your link page, and you'll see on there that the food processor is very simple. It's got 2 paddles on it, like on, off, and pulse. And it's really the one, I think it has like 10,000 positive reviews on Amazon. Wirecutter recommends it. Wirecutter is the sort of Consumer Reports type arm of the New York Times. So that's really the one, if you're in the market for a food processor, that's really the one you ought to look at. So anyway, I'm going to take this baby and put it aside because we're not going to need this one tonight. And one of the reasons I bought that, frankly, one of the reasons I bought that big one to begin with is because I was, you know, after making pastry in the food processor for a long time, I was really curious about how to do a good job making a double batch, you know, enough pie pastry for a top and a bottom crust. And I played with it with the big food processor I just had up here. I've done it in this smaller one that I have. And I tell you, I have never, ever been satisfied with making a double batch in the food processor. I have recipes for it. I talk about how to do it. But I'm not even going to show tonight how we do that. I'm simply going to make a single recipe. And I'm going to tell you that if you need 2 doughs, if you need one for a top and a bottom crust, make them separately. Your life will be so much easier. The problem with the food processor is, this one, that one, virtually any of them, is once you put that many ingredients in the bowl of the food processor and start mixing, it's very hard to do to mix the dough evenly. It only takes about a minute longer to do 2 separate batches, so that's what I recommend. I sometimes get flack for this. People say, oh, it's, that's simple enough to do that, to make a double batch in there. I never, ever have liked it, so I'm not going to teach it. I don't teach it very much. At least I'm not going to teach it in this class. So, sweetie, have we had any questions or comments yet that I should be aware of?
Well, Donna loves the Pie Academy book. She
Oh,
says
Donna,
it's the
okay.
best.
Thank you, Donna. Donna loves the Pie Academy book, and wherever you are, Donna, and whoever you are, I appreciate it. That's great. So let's get started here. I think I've covered all the preliminary stuff. We're 15 minutes in, so let's get going here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mixing up a batch of dough. So let's get going here. Now normally, I do, if you saw that video I put at the bottom of your link page, you saw that there was a video in there. If you haven't looked at it, you should. It's a video all about how I feel about measuring flour and ingredients for your pie dough. And I know a lot of people are into weight measures, and I think weight measures are fine if that's what you're into. I know we have people at the Pie Academy who like to do it that way. I don't do it that way myself. I really never have. I'll weigh Crisco if I'm using that sometimes, but I don't always. I don't really like or recommend using the scale for flour. And I tell you what, it boils down to one thing. A couple of things. When I first started making pie dough, I used cups back in those days in the 70s and 80s. You could not find a baking book that had weight measurements in it, other than outside the professional realm. So that's kind of what I got used to doing. And that's the way I do it now. And I get very consistent results. I like the results I get, so I don't feel like it's something I need to change. So this is how I do it. And I'm not going to spend a long time on this because I put the video on your link page. But basically what I do is sort of, some describe it as sort of a self-sifting process, where you just take your dough and you sort of lightly deposit it into your cup, into your measuring cup. And these are dry measuring cups, remember. These are the type where you're supposed to fill it and then level off the top, like so. So that's my cup of flour. So whether it's your cup of flour or your half cup, here's my half cup measure, I do the same thing. And that goes right into my food processor, just like that. Very simple. Now I follow that with a little bit of cornstarch. That's a cup and a half. By the way, the recipe you should have in front of you is the recipe I sent for the all butter pie dough. It's all butter food processor pie dough. So that's the first dry ingredient. The next dry ingredient is a little cornstarch. I add just a little cornstarch. People say, why do you add cornstarch to pie dough? The reason I add cornstarch is because I believe it adds just a little bit of tenderness to, in fact, he says right on the label there, gluten-free. If you ever buy cake flour, you've probably bought cake flour and use it to make cakes with. One of the ingredients in cake flour is cornstarch, and it's in there to help tenderize the cakes that you make. It does the same thing for your pie dough. That's why I use just a little bit, about 1.5 teaspoons. And then I add a little bit of salt, about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And just like that, just about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now sometimes I'll hear from people who say they're on a salt-restricted diet, and can you leave the salt out or reduce it? And I say, yes, of course you can reduce it. If you can, if you feel more comfortable health-wise only using, say, 1/4 teaspoon, that's great. Just use 1/4 teaspoon. But try not to use none, because that will really make your pie pastry taste a bit flat. So I would not do none if I could help it. So why aren't I putting my ingredients in the bowl? Very simple, because I have a habit, one thing I like to do is I like to bag up my ingredients ahead of time. So this is what I do. I take my dry ingredients and I mix my 1.5 cups of flour, my 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch, and my salt, and I put them in these little bags, and I'll either stick them in the back of the fridge or in the freezer somewhere where they'll, you know, they'll never go bad, basically. And then I have them, and you know, I'm a big believer in removing any obstacle you can to making pies the next time. So if you have, and this is a especially good tip for around the holidays, if you have the holidays coming up, I'm talking about Thanksgiving through Christmas, and you know you're going to make, I don't know, 10, 15 pies. A lot of us will, you know, make that many. It's so nice to just, you know, one of the things that takes a long time with pie making is you take all your ingredients out, and then you measure your ingredients, and then you put all your stuff away, you clean your measuring cups, blah, blah, blah. If you do that, if you take all your stuff out once, measure and put it into these, you know, freezer baggies, and do up a bunch of these, you'll just save time later on. So I really like doing that. So that's one of my first tips for the day. Try to bag up your dry ingredients ahead of time so they're all ready for you. So that's what this is. And so we're going to put that in the food processor. And then we're going to give it a quick little buzz. Now, butter. Let's get our butter out. Now, normally, all I use, well, not normally, all I ever use is regular American style butter. You know, so occasionally someone will say to me, oh, you know, should I use, you know, do I have to use Land O'Lakes butter, or should I use, you know, Plugras or one of those, you know, European butters? And I'll say, no, yeah, I mean, you could spend your money on, you know, $10, $12 a pound. I don't know, I haven't priced it recently for one of those, you know, fancy European butters, but why bother? You can get a perfectly good result with Aldi butter. This is Aldi butter here, like $2.18 a pound last time I checked, and it does a great job. And this is 10 tablespoons of butter right here. Once again, you know, I cut it up ahead of time and I bag it up. It's one less thing you have to do when you go to make your pie, and it's just going to save you time. Not, you know, it's going to eliminate those obstacles that I talk about. So the way I do this is I cut the stick into tablespoon pieces. So let's say that's our tablespoon right there, and then I cut each of those tablespoons into dice, cubes, like that, 4 equal cubes, and that's how I cut my butter. Very simple. So that we're going to add that all at once, right into the food processor. Come on, you. Now, especially when you're using cold butter, cold ingredients, sometimes if your butter is real cold, it's going to kick stuff up. And this food processor, being as old as it is, does not have most of them today have some sort of a rubber gasket in here. This one doesn't, so you'll see when I start this up, probably going to get some water going, or excuse me, some flour going out the side of this thing. Oh, it did good that time. So we're going to give it 4 or 5 pulses. And by a pulse, I'm just talking about something about a second long. So that was like 5. Let me see how we're doing with that. So what we're looking for as we look in here, and be very careful not to cut yourself when you reach into a food processor. I've done it many times, take it from me. So we're looking for the butter cut into, you know, nice. This is too big. Okay, so we're going to give it, this is like little rock size. We're looking for little split pea type size. So we're going to put this back. So we're pretty confident that this is not as well mixed as we would like. So let's do this again. Put the lid on and give it a go. it's better, but it's getting a little warm in here, which is going to, break the butter down even quicker. So I'm only going to give it one more. And that's all she wrote. Okay, so that's our dry mixture with our butter cut in. All right, very, very simple. Sweetie, do you have any questions that you need to fire at me? I have time for a couple of questions before we add the water.
Okay, yeah, Cynthia wants to know, do you prefer the cubed butter to be frozen or simply chilled?
Cynthia wants to know, and remember, you can pull the comments onto the screen when you want one. Cynthia wants to know if we need to freeze the butter. No, you can store it in the freezer. I wouldn't put it into the machine frozen though. I'd let it sit at room temperature for a few minutes before, just so you want it just nice and cold. It doesn't have to be frozen. Any other questions, sweetie?
You just use regular table salt, correct?
Yes, regular table salt, and as I should have mentioned this, for the flour, I use gold medal bleached all-purpose flour. That's the type of flour I like. So for the liquid, what I'm going to do first with the liquid is I'm going to add just a little bit of vinegar. I usually add about 2 teaspoons of vinegar. And what the vinegar does is a couple of things. I maintain that it helps make the pie pastry a little bit more tender. Some take exception to that. I guess there's some science type pie makers out there who don't know that that's, or who would say that may not be true. But there is evidence that one thing vinegar does do is it helps prevent your, and I'm going to add just enough water here to come almost up to 1/3 of a cup. That one thing the vinegar does do is it helps prevent your pastry from developing a gray sort of shade or cast if it sits in the refrigerator for more than a day. Sometimes I don't know if you may have noticed, if you take one of your pie doughs and stick it in the fridge, you don't get to it. It's wrapped in a disc and you don't get to it for a few days. You may notice that it starts to turn gray. Well, the vinegar will help prevent that from happening. By the way, that grayness does not necessarily affect the flavor in any ways. It's just somewhat unsightly, that's all.
And that's
So,
unsalted butter.
and that's unsalted butter. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier.
And
So,
cold water.
and cold water, yes. So here we've cut our butter up. It has a nice size to it. Some pieces there are a little bigger than I would like, but that's okay. And we're going to add, so I have that little bit of vinegar in here, sweetie, and enough water to come almost up to the 1/3 mark. So I'm going to add about half of that to the food processor. And then I'm going to quickly put the lid back on and mix that in. Give it four mixes real quick. Then I'm going to just do this and loosen it up a little bit from the bottom. I just like to loosen it up because, like I said earlier, food processors will virtually always compact things. We don't want to compact it. Now this time, I'm going to add most of the rest of the water, but I'm not going to add about a tablespoon of the liquid. So we'll reserve about that much in case we need it. So once again, I put the lid on. And let's see how it looks. So it's looking pretty good. So one thing you can do, it's started to form clumps. I think if you read your recipe, you'll see that I said until it starts to form clumps, but still looks, sort of separate. Well, that's exactly what this look is. It started to form some clumps, but it's still pretty separate. One sort of the acid test for knowing whether you've added enough liquid is you can take some of the mixture from off the bottom and then just press it together with your fingers, like so. And so long as it holds together and doesn't sort of crumble dry apart, you're all set. And this is doing that just fine. So we have success.
Okay, so I have a question.
Okay, question.
How about using kosher salt?
Kosher salt's fine. It's a little bit, it can be a little bit coarse, so it may not incorporate quite as well, but it's fine. You can use it.
Okay, and here's a question about the vodka.
Oh, the vodka question. I'll tell you what, let me, I want to get this because we've got the butter in here and the temperature being what it is. I'll answer the vodka question in just a minute. We get that a lot. But let me go to this next step here while the pastry is still at a nice temperature. So here's what we do next. We take our, and this is the part you may never have seen before. We take food wrap. This happens to be a big industrial roll of food service wrap, and we put 3. You don't need this, by the regular. Don't let me scare you. Your regular Saran wrap is fine. We put 3 overlapping pieces next to one another, about 2 feet long, and we line them up like this. I'll be anxious to hear if anybody does this other than the class regulars. I know our class regulars are familiar with this process and love it. So what I'm going to do is take this, put it aside, and I'm going to take our dough mixture, which doesn't look like it's going to be a dough yet, but we're going to turn it out right into the middle of this target here, this plastic wrap target. This is what I call the gather and press method. So what we do is it's all sitting here right in the middle of our target. So now what we're going to do is take the paper, or take the plastic wrap from opposite sides, and we're going to start gathering it together like this. We're going to press on it, and at first we're not going to do anything other than to just sort of corral it, okay? So we're corralling it like so. And we're pressing down on it as well, okay? So we're pressing down and corralling, and we're going to do this repeatedly. We're sort of bringing our knuckles together in the center as we do it. Now, because I've been talking a lot as I'm doing this, the dough is a little bit softer than it would normally be. I like to start with good cold ingredients, especially in the summertime, because it'll keep your dough nice and cool. When your dough starts to get kind of warm and tacky, it's not going to stay as flaky. So this is a little bit softer than it should be. But basically that's the idea. You just take it and you shape it into a disc like this. And the nice thing about this is, especially if you're a new pie maker, maybe you've never made this type of dough before and you're a little bit nervous. When we're nervous, our palms especially, get warm, and we start handling the dough, and it starts to get all tacky, and the butter starts to melt. And anytime that happens, your dough is not going to be as flaky. So this is just a way to keep your hands off the dough. You're just kind of using the plastic wrap to guide and compress this. So once we have it in the shape we want, about not quite an inch thick, maybe 3/4 of an inch thick, we take our, so you can see there, I don't know if you can see that, but it just, the way it came off the plastic like that, the butter got a little soft there. So we're going to do that, no problem. We're just going to dust it with a little bit of flour. And then we'll take this and we'll put it right in the fridge, just like so. And that's our dough. Very, very simple to do. Now we'll probably have questions about that, but as far as the vodka goes, people ask me all the time about vodka. I've known about the vodka trick, using vodka for some of the liquid in a pie dough. I have known about that trick since it first came out in, I think it was Cook's Illustrated, years ago. I can honestly say I have never tried it. I can't vouch for it. I've heard many people say it works great. I've heard that the fellow who even came up with it now, you know, he's not discounting it, but he's more or less saying there, you know, it's not the only way you can do it. There's other good ways to do it too. And I think he's not, like I say, I don't think he discounted it, but he's not making such a big deal out of it anymore. Plus, I don't keep vodka around, so I don't really have the opportunity to do it. So then this goes just like this. This goes into your refrigerator. You know, it's got all this plastic on it that we shaped it or formed it with. So that's all the plastic it needs in the refrigerator. But if you were to take this and freeze this dough, and a dough like this will freeze very nicely. You know, it'll stay in the freezer for a good couple of months before it starts to show any deterioration whatsoever. But if you are going to put it in the freezer, do the plastic wrap first and then stick it in a plastic freezer bag and mark it so you know what it is. I often have different doughs hanging around and in different locations, so I like to mark the bag so I know what it is.
And when you want to use it, when you want to use it, take it out.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And then Bev is reminding me. So when you want to use it from the frozen state, you can do a couple of different things. I normally just take it out the night before, put it in the refrigerator, and then I'll roll it. You know, when and then it's, you know, it'll thaw overnight in the refrigerator. Or you could take it right out of the freezer if you're going to use it. You want to roll it the same day. Take it out of the freezer and put it into. Just leave it at room temperature until it's rollable, which is the next thing we're going to do. We're going to roll it. So let's roll our dough. We're not going to roll that one because that one is too soft to roll. That dough should refrigerate for at least an hour before you roll it. That was probably the next question that someone's going to ask, that, right? So let me get one out that I made earlier. And see what I've done? I mark this. I mark everything. When it goes in the freezer, I really like to mark everything because you know how freezers are. They just sort of, you put stuff in the freezer and God knows if you'll ever see it again or remember what it was when you finally find it 3 years later. So I like to mark things. This, you can see here I have all butter FP. Which way should it be? Oh, okay. Bev uses a lot of sign language to try to tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing. This is all butter FP food processor crust, so that way I know our pastry. Pastry before you bake it, crust after. So that way I know what it is. So let's roll this guy out. This is one I made earlier. It's been sitting in the fridge for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours now, maybe a little bit longer. And I made it by the exact same method that I just showed you a minute ago. And
Ask you a question.
Someone has a question? Okay, fire away.
Can I use lemon instead of vinegar in the dough?
Someone wants to know if they can use lemon instead of vinegar in the dough. I don't do that much. I don't see there'd be any problem though. I think that's perfectly fine. They're both have that acidity to it, and I think they would both serve the same function. So I would give that a big thumbs up. So let's get ready to roll this. And by the way, I should talk about this. This is my baking setup. I should have introduced you to this a while ago. I use a 16 by 24 baking mat underneath. I think I put the link for this on your link page. And I like this for my surfaces because it protects them in general and because I always roll on, not just roll, I do virtually everything in the kitchen on sheets of, full sheets of parchment, 16 by 24 sheets of parchment, which you can get on Amazon. I buy it 1,000 sheets at a time at Web Restaurant Store. I'm not sure that you want that many at a time, but you can find it if you go to Amazon, 16 by 24 is the size, or maybe 16.5 by 24.5. But that's really the size I like. Now you could do this. Both of these things come in half sizes. That's 12 by 16. And you know, that's I think what most people probably have in their kitchens who have this setup. So you could do the same thing on a 16 by 24 setup as well. But I just happen to like these big sheets and this big baking sheet here. So let's start rolling. Now this dough is a little bit cold. And when the dough is cold, and when I start doughs out, those of you who come to our regular classes know what I'm going to say next. I always like using this. This is the Pie Academy French style rolling pin. And unlike the big bakery rolling pin that I use, this is thinner, narrower, and it's fatter in the middle. It's tapered on the ends and fatter in the middle. And also, unlike the bigger pin, your force and your energy doesn't have to go through the handles, so you don't lose any of your oomph. So you can get more oomph on this when the dough is cold, which is really nice, because when you're starting to roll the dough and it's cold, you really need all the oomph you can get. So that's what I'm doing, and I usually use our pin, our French style pin, for about the first 8 or 9 inches before I finish it off with the big bakery pin. Now notice when I roll, I'm always rolling in a very narrow spectrum. I'm rolling from about 11 o'clock to about 2 o'clock at the most, and I continually move the dough, rotate the dough, so that I know it's not sticking. Okay? That's the last thing we want as pie makers. We don't want our dough sticking. So we have to make sure that it doesn't do that. Now, occasionally we have to put a little more flour on top, a little more underneath, but you can see every 2 or 3 rolls, I'm lifting the dough up and just sort of doing a quick check and making sure that it's not sticking. So now I've got it to, I said earlier, I usually take it to about 8 or 9 inches until I switch. I could do the whole thing with this, but the problem with that is it's hard to get it flat, because the middle is thicker, so your dough is going to be a little thinner if you roll the whole thing out with this. This is why I often switch. I said 9 inches. See how I did. Yeah, it's a little more than 9 inches. I often will switch at this point to my big pin. So is everyone entertaining you over there in the chat, sweetie? Bev loves doing the chat because she's very social, much more sociable than me. So she loves getting the comments in and responding to the comments. And we have a lot of regulars who come to our classes, and I know they enjoy talking with Bev. She's very sociable, like I said. She loves her job over there. So here we go. We're gonna take this and we're gonna roll it into about a, I don't know, about a 12-inch circle before we do anything with it, maybe even a 13-inch circle. So notice again, I'm rolling it, and I'm starting, when I roll, I start from the center out. You don't want to roll from here all the way over there, because what will happen oftentimes is if this dough catches on your pin, if say you press down there and it catches on the pin, you're going to push that thing out in front of you, and before you know it, that dough is going to be married to the dough on the other side. You're going to make this big tube of dough, and it's going to get stuck together. So we have a nice bit of dough here. And the other thing I like, this is just about our right size here. We're going for say a 12-inch circle here. This is 13. We went a little bit big, but that's okay. I'm going to trim it up, actually. I have a little template I'm going to trim it up with. So the other thing I like about this rolling pin, this one, it's hard to demonstrate on this because this one's nice and round, but say this edge is a little bit flat here. So say you were doing something and you just wanted to do a more precise job with your rolling. Because this dough, or because this pin is thicker in the middle, you can actually use that to your advantage. So I could take, so notice how it's flat here. I could take this and put a little pressure on that and just scoot it out a little bit, and you'll see it helps to round things off a little bit. It gives you sort of like pinpoint precision control.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay, Bev has a question, or somebody has a question.
Yeah. When the butter softens too much during handling, will chilling it thoroughly correct this?
Why don't you put that question on the screen?
Oh.
Right in the center of the thing. All you have to do is click the center of that comment, or of the icon. Did it work?
No.
Okay. And we're trying to have some technical issues here, but that's okay. So the question was, when the butter what?
When the butter softens too much during handling, will chilling it thoroughly correct this?
Yeah.
Thus restoring the pastry to a flaky texture.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Someone who asked that?
Cynthia.
Cynthia asked, if the butter starts to get too soft, is it going to have a negative outcome on your pie dough? Will it be, and can you reverse that by chilling the dough? Well, that's a good question, and the answer is yes, you actually can. See and this is the other good thing about the rolling onto parchment like this. See, I can take, let's pretend this, I don't have my cookie sheet near me, but let's pretend this is my cookie sheet right here. So let's say an important call came in that I just had to take while I was in the middle of rolling this dough. So what I could do is I could take my parchment paper and roll and just slip my cookie sheet right under it and do that and pull the dough right onto my cookie sheet like this. And then I could put the whole thing right in the refrigerator, cookie sheet and all. You might have to move some things around, at least in my fridge you would, to get it to fit in there. But then, then you're more or less salvaging your dough. It's going to be much easier after you take it out of the fridge, after say 10 minutes. It's going to be, just much easier to handle. It's going to be more cooperative, and it won't be sticky and tacky anymore. So just keep that trick in mind. Hope that helps.
Now also on that lemon and vinegar.
Yeah, the lemon and vinegar.
Still 1-to-1?
Yes. Yeah. The question was, would you substitute the same amount of vinegar or lemon juice as you would vinegar in the pie crust recipe? And my answer is yes. So let's get this into our pan. I'm going to actually use this. I'm probably even going to use this crust this weekend in our class. So. By the way, and tomorrow I'll send you, in case you lost the email about our classes this weekend, just in case some of you want to come, if you think, and in a little bit I'm going to show you some video clips of what we'll be doing this weekend. We'd love to have you, so I'll send you information tomorrow in case you missed the other email about signing up for the class. So anyway, before this gets too warm, like we were talking about, let me get this into the pan. So this is a nice, flexible, still cool dough that's not going to give me any problem. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to fold it in half. Now I could fold it in quarters at this point, and put the tip of the quarters right there and unfold it. But I just had to fold it right in half. So there we go. Now, one thing you want to do before you start pressing this into the pan is you want to make sure that you sort of have it positioned correctly so you have a more or less even amount of overhang all around. And then once you feel confident that you do, you just sort of, ease up on the sides. You take weight off the sides like that, and then you just sort of ease it down into your pan. And you do that all the way around.
What do you think about a marble rolling pin?
Someone wants to know what I think about a marble rolling pin. I think they're marvelous. That was a joke. No, I've never had one. I know people, some people who have them, who like them. The nice thing about marble is it stays cool, so that's an advantage. So you know, I think they're fine. Like I said, I've never owned one. Probably wouldn't go out and buy one, but if you have one and you like it, that's fabulous. Now, okay, so what we have here is a little bit of overhang, and I'm going to shape that. Sweetie, why don't you switch to the side camera? I'm going to shape that into our upstanding ridge. This is the part I call shaping the dough into an upstanding ridge. I'll move a little closer here. So all I'm doing is I'm turning the overhang this way. I'm turning it under and sort of pinching it into a ridge. And you do that all the way around, like so. And
Susan says that her dough cracks when she rolls it. What's wrong?
Susan's dough cracks when she rolls it. Susan, sounds like you may not be, unless you have the dough so cold that it's cracking, which I doubt. You probably just need to add more moisture to it. It probably just doesn't have enough water. So next time you make it, try adding a little bit more water. So that's how we make our. You want to switch to this camera, sweetie, up here? So that's how we do it. You know, it only took us 50 minutes. At home, it would probably take you about 10 minutes to make a nice pie crust, roll it out about an hour later, and get it into a pan. And that's all she wrote. Now, one thing I could do is I could also show you, this is a trick that our Pie Academy class regulars know all about. You switch to this side camera, sweetie. And, you know, we do this sort of thing where you, you know, just make a fluted edge like that. You probably can see it actually better from above. Why don't we switch to that camera? So we use the thumb here and we press out like that. So we form these little ridges like so. And do that all around. There's lots of different things. I'm making a video very soon about different things you can do to the edge of your pastry to make it look attractive. But this is just one of those things.
Roseanne wants to know, what are the holes for in the pie pans that she has? Metal.
Yeah, Roseanne has a pie pan with holes in the bottom, and she wants to know what they're for. That's so your butter can leak out all over your oven. No, no, that's actually so. I have some, in fact, I have a pan right here. That might have that. You know, some of these, here's an old pie pan. This is, if you're from New England or know New England, this is a Table Talk pie pan. Table Talk is a famous New England pie. I think they're in limited business, maybe not too much in business anymore. But some of their pie pans have holes in the bottom, and it's just a way of allowing the heat to penetrate faster, I guess, and more intensely, because that's always the thing in pie baking. You want to really get a nice quick browning on the bottom of your crust, because that's where you want your crust to be nice and crusty on the bottom like that. So that's what that is all about. So.
Did you use the USA?
Yes, well, I didn't. Yes, this pan I used is actually the one that I should have mentioned it, because this is the pan that I recommend in the links. This is the USA pan. And I tell you, these things are durable as all get out. They're just the best pans. It's called aluminized steel, and it's the best material for pie pans. I just love it. Your crusts get nice and crusty on the bottom. I forget how much the pan is. It's like $15 or $20 or something like that. But I guarantee you that's a pan you'll have for life, because it's so durable. So I would, if I was in the market for a pie pan, I would definitely get one of those. And again, it's in your link list somewhere. what else was I going to say? Yeah, so this was just meant to be, you know, a fun short class. Turned out to be under an hour, so we're gonna keep it there. Before I let you go, though, I want to show you a couple of clips. You probably saw the video the other day that I sent out advertising the July classes. I made an even shorter one to show you tonight. In case you missed that one, I just got some choice clips in there about what we'll be doing, and I want you to keep an eye out for a couple of things. When, like I said, there's only about 1:10 seconds, but when I take I show you our mason jar lid pies. When I take that in this video, and when I take that mason jar lid pie out of the lid, and I cut it, notice how the pastry has these beautiful flakes around the side. It's almost like these flakes are stacked right on top of one another. That's this crust here. I mean, that'll give you some idea how well that crust behaves. So keep an eye out for that. Also keep an eye out for I'm making these sort of, I call them Pop-Tart knockoffs. They're like, what do I call them? It's like toaster pastries. You wouldn't put them in like this type of toaster, but you put them in your toaster oven. But notice with those that on the color of the dough, you're going to say, wow, that dough is kind of brown. That's actually whole wheat flour, and that's a special flour that I like using in those. And we're going to use that this weekend in our class to make these toaster pastries. It does such a nice job. It's a very tender flour because it's a low gluten flour. So we'll be using that to make these toaster pastries. So also notice how I've actually cut out the top of one of the toaster pastries and put a brown topping or a brown sugar topping on it, sort of a streusel topping. So you'll see them with full tops, and you'll see them with that crumb topping too. I think you'll really like that. And then after that, for the last 20 seconds, the video shows the two corn pies we're going to make this weekend. The savory corn pies, not this weekend, but the following weekend in that class. So anyway, Bev is going to play that for you, then we'll come back and I'll say goodbye.
Answer any questions.
Okay, great. I hope you enjoyed that. That was fun. I always like to set these things to music. Sometimes I choose real peppy music because I know I'll be playing the video about an hour and a half into the class. I want to wake everybody up if we're starting to flag. But anyway, before I forget, I think somebody asked about the replay. This whole, obviously, you'll be able to refer back to all those links. And the same link button that let you into the class will be how you watch the replay. So I'm going to go change the name of it tomorrow. I'll put on something like class replay there. But just know that that's how you watch the replay. Other than that, there was a question about, what was it? You have
Pyrex glass.
Oh yeah, Pyrex versus metal pans. If I had to choose one, I'd choose the metal pan. Pyrex, there are things I like about Pyrex pans. They're a little slow to heat up, but when they get hot, they really get hot. And when you take them out of the oven, sometimes they'll stay hot for a long time and continue to cook your crust. So that's maybe a discussion for another day. But let's just say if I was choosing one over the other, I'd get the USA pan, metal pan, which is not to say I probably have 6 or 8 really nice Pyrex type pans that I like in my pantry. One in particular, it's kind of shallow because in the summertime, especially, you get berries are expensive, and sometimes I don't want to make a pie that's got 8 cups of fresh berries. I want to make one that has 4 or 5 cups. So I use my shallow Pyrex pan, and that works really nicely. Was there one other question?
Yes. Are there any differences in the end product between a food processor pie dough and a handmade pastry?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question, and I'm sure there's a lot of debate, and a lot of people feel strongly about that. But the question is, are there a lot of differences between the end products if you're using a food processor or making the dough by hand? There may be with food processors, because they're very efficient and they can cut the fat in very fine. Sometimes the flakes are finer. When you're making a pie crust by hand and using, say, your pastry blender to work in the fat, sometimes the pieces of fat stay in larger pieces. So, and consequently, the flake in your pie tends to be larger. But smaller flake, medium flake, large flake, it all tastes the same, and I think it's all wonderful. The important part is that we're all, I didn't really do a good job of introducing the Pie Academy when we first started, but the Pie Academy is we're an online community. There's more than 4,000 of us now, and we're passionate about pie. That's the thing that all sort of binds us together. We all love pie, sweet pies and savory pies, and I teach different ones from those categories in all of our different classes. But the thing that sort of binds us together is that we love pie, and some of us love pie crust made in the food processor. Some of us swear by doing it by hand. Some of us love Crisco crust. I swear to God, my dad would make Crisco crust when I was a kid. He just used the recipe on the can. I swear, his were the best, crusts I've ever tasted. So, we all have these things that they're traditions, they're personal biases, things we love. There's room for all of that. And you find a way to make pie that works for you, I think that's great. I don't care how you do it. If it works for you and you love it and you enjoy the process, that's what this is all about. So,
will you be sending out the information about the Sunday class?
Oh yes, absolutely. I will send out to everyone who's attended tonight. I'll resend the information about Sunday's classes, so you'll have that. We would love to have you there. We have such a wonderful. It seems like a core group of people who come. We always bring in new people, and that's wonderful too. But we have a core group who has been very supportive from the very start with our classes. We love all of these folks, and there's nothing we love more than to have new people joining the crowd every time we hold a new course. So we'd love to see any of you there who have an inkling, want to try a class out. Sign up for Sunday's class, sign up for both of them. You get a better deal if you sign up for both. I'll send all that out tomorrow. And 8 o'clock. Anyway, it's 8 o'clock. Bev is over there furiously trying to answer emails.
There we go.
I think we're gonna say goodbye. So I know there's lots more we can talk about. We'll plan another free class before too long. I don't know when. I don't know what it'll be, but maybe you've got some good feedback for me that we can take into consideration. Meanwhile, I hope you come to our July classes. I'm sure we'll have some wonderful August ones too. So sayonara. We'll see you later, and thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it.